University of Missouri's College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources, or CAFNR, is a national leader in agricultural development. Through numerous programs of distinction, their research improves the health of people, animals, environments, and more, shaping the next generation of ag and natural resource leaders and making discoveries that impact not just our country, but the entire world. I'm Rachael Norden, and in this series of Thinking Out Loud, I sit down with the directors of these programs to shine a light on these unsung heroes of agriculture and bring their research to you. This episode, we hear from Dr. Michael Stambaugh, Associate Professor of Forest Ecology and Director for the Center of Tree Ring Science, a sector of CAFNR dedicated to the science of dendrochronology, or the study and dating of tree rings, and how interpreting these rings help us interpret the stories of trees.
So I'm interested in how forests change because forests are constantly changing, and we just often don't recognize that. Forests change slowly over long time scales. We are actually quite short-lived as a species, and trees, by comparison, are much longer lived. They can even be preserved for even longer than that, and so if you can see through the lens of the tree, you can see much greater time and also these subtle changes that you really need a lot of time in order to capture. And each forest is different. So the forests of Missouri are different than the forests of New York or California. And so each place gives its own kind of flavor of change, history, and also the things that are important to change. In some places it might be rain. In other places it might be drought. In other places it might be people. And so each place gives its own little storyline and helps us to understand all the different kind of complex dynamics that can influence forests. It's not so simple that you can use one place for all, or one example for all places. So you need to kind of see a lot of places and see a lot of time to start kind of getting a handle on where are we going into the future. And tree rings are amazing in that way.
Yeah. Just wrapping my head around it is so to be able to have those conversations with the past and the future in that way just has to be a really cool and insightful thing to do. This is more of a personal curiosity, this next question I'm asking, but what kinds of stories do the trees around here tell?
A lot of our trees around here, meaning around maybe Columbia, are very young. And so they are dense. There are a lot of trees in Columbia compared to what Columbia might have looked like 200 years ago. Most people think that we have fewer trees than maybe we did in the past, but in fact, in a lot of places we have many more trees than we did, say, a couple hundred years ago. A lot of our forests were cut over in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and forests bounced right back, and there are actually more trees now probably than there were before that. But if you know where to look, there are the what I call elders in and amongst them. And so there are some really neat neighborhoods, especially in the old Southwest, some of these really rocky slopes that have really old chinkapin oaks that date through 200 to 300 plus years ago. Of course, we have the McBain bur oak down in the bottom. It's a singular tree. But Boone County actually has quite a few really old trees, some of them more than 500 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to know. And I'm glad you brought up the bur oak because I was gonna ask about it, what kind of stories it tells. I honestly could just go on and on about these kinds of things. So I'll move on here. So we got also in your bio, it states that you collaborate with the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, and multiple state natural resource organizations. So I was wondering if you could clarify, is this work that you do personally in the research you do, or is this the whole organization of CRTS that does these collaborations? And how do those collaborations work?
It is me personally, but I'm one of several staff at the center, and everyone, if needed, interacts with these agencies. Natural resources is kind of a family-oriented field. So it's easy to interact with others. So it's easy for me to interact with all these agencies. They often come to us seeking information that will help them manage some natural resource, a tree, a bird, and our data are often some of the only ways to get some of the answers that they need about what was this environment like before we cut all the forest. So prior to 1900, did it look like it did today, or was it very different? We know our species say it's in decline. Is that because something has changed? What's changed? And we can quantify that. We can measure that with trees. The tree rings themselves tell us about the climate of the past. They tell us about how dense the forest was in the past. They tell us about disturbances like fires, how often fires occurred in the past, how often maybe freeze events happened in the past. So we can kind of really recreate a lot of the conditions that is enough information for natural resource managers to kind of make these decisions about managing a species in an environment that doesn't exist today. And luckily the trees, I call them witnesses, luckily they're still there to share what that historical condition was. And trees are good witnesses because, they don't trick you too much and they don't move around. So they're stationary in that one place for a long period of time. And there aren't many things that can record time perfectly in one place over hundreds of years, like a tree.
Yeah. What a fascinating way to think about it. And you answered it a little bit, this next question I have, so I'll go ahead and ask it in case we have anything to add to it. But dendrochronology, am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. Dendro meaning tree, and chronology being the study of something through time. So that's very self-explanatory. So your work is associated with dating and interpretation of annual growth rings in trees, which can inform a wide variety of disciplines and decision-making, as you've just explained. So the website for CTRS goes on to explain that you can use tree rings to reconstruct past climate conditions, characterize historical fire regimes, study forest growth dynamics, date historic structures, and more. So as you kind of already have, I wondered exactly how the work that CTRS does informs those disciplines and decisions. And I feel like you explained that pretty well already. But if you have any other thoughts on it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than what I mentioned. So some things I didn't mention was that we can actually look at the individual cells in the ring. So when people think of tree rings, they may think of these bands of growth that they may see on the end of a branch or a stump or something like that. And that's true. That's what a tree ring is. But imagine you can look at every cell in every ring, and every cell is a information bit. And so if it's not formed correctly, we know in that week what happened. And so we can go cell by cell or ring by ring. And so there's just a whole lot of even finer scale information than down to the single year that we can get. We can also extract the chemicals from the wood. And so because the wood is laid down in perfect time, we can look at how chemical changes happen in the wood over time too. So we have not only the growth, but the chemistry potentially, as well as other types of information we can extract.
Do you ever, and this may seem like a strange question, but do you ever see trees in a certain area having conversations with each other through these rings? Is that something that happens that you can see? If you're studying a group of trees, do they all say the same thing, or do they all say something a little different about the same time?
I'm not sure to use the word conversation, but they certainly, in a small area, they all are beating to the same tune. So, for example, in Colombia, if we have a dry year, all the trees have a small ring because they're all responding to the same kind of stressor. Unless that tree is maybe growing right next to the river, it has its roots in water that it can kind of get past that dry year without having a small ring. But most trees are beating to the same rhythm. And There's a little nuances between tree to tree. Maybe one has a broken branch or one is a little shorter than another. So there's a little bit of variability, but by and large, they are all beating to the same kind of rhythm through time. And that rhythm is often reflecting some strong, what we call signal. And often that signal is the climate of the place. So slow growth, dry, high, wide rings, good growth. It's often wetter.
Can you describe for me what sorts of methods and techniques that you and CTRS use to determine the year that rings were formed? Meaning, like, what kinds of tools you use, what kind of techniques to actually hone in on that information?
So we do a lot of our work under some kind of magnification. That is often a microscope. And so we are looking at every cell within every ring, typically at about 40 magnification, 40 power or more. And so we have some high precision measuring instruments like you would use in, machine making, that we can measure every ring to 1,000th of a millimeter precision. And we can do that in pretty short order because there are a lot of rings to be measured. Often we measure maybe 20,000 rings in a week on some of these samples. We also are able to take really high resolution images of the wood, and we do have some kind of automated robots that can automate some of these measuring processes and even do some automatic identification of rings. Those are often have to be supervised by someone who's able to cross-check that. But we have a lot of really sophisticated tools that we use, not only to measure but also to analyze the growth of trees.
According to the history on your website, tree ring studies have been conducted at the University of Missouri since 1968. And beginning in 1980, increased emphasis was placed on climate research. So I'm just curious, was there a specific reason the research was expanded, or did that just naturally happen? I'm particularly interested in the increased climate emphasis in 1980.
Yeah, some of the earliest climate change programs with the federal government were in the late 70s and 1980s. And some of the effort to start to try to document climate change used tree rings and other what we call proxies like ice cores, soil sediments. But tree rings were a big one, especially for kind of continental locations on the planet. And so our lab, at that time, Rich Guyette was the primary person in the lab. He did a lot of work throughout the central United States collecting samples of really old trees to help kind of start documenting these changes in climate.
It looks like you've actually recently gone through a name change from the Missouri Tree Ring Laboratory to what you are today. And in 2021 is when you received your Program of Distinction status within CAFNR in 2024. Congratulations for that, by the way. So kind of a two-part question. First, what inspired the name change?
When I first started the lab, it was a lab besides me of one person. And that one person was really happy to be working alone and pursuing these awesome questions. And I thought that this lab is amazing. It needs more recognition. And so then we called it the Missouri Tree Ring Lab, just to give us some kind of recognition, something to refer to. And it's amazing. People just start calling you that. Like, we didn't really advertise it or ask, but so we quickly got that recognition, and we partner with people all over, the world. And so that kind of comes back around, and we just receive more and more recognition. And there was an opportunity to apply to be recognized as a center on campus for this research. And anyone can apply if you have a program, that meets some of the criteria. And so, I like to dream big, and we went for it. And after a couple of tries, we've achieved this center status. And, I do think we deserve it. We are, I would say, a medium-sized tree ring lab, but there aren't many tree ring labs in the world. And so we are very distinct, unique. you can't learn tree ring research from a book, and you really have to go through like an apprenticeship, in-person experience to learn this. And so we're valuable in that way. We keep the science alive and moving forward. And they also recognize that with our recognition as a program of distinction in the last year or two.
Absolutely. Well, I agree with you. I think you guys are very deserving of this distinction. It is obviously a program that, since its inception, your work has been very impactful. So I wonder, in this final question here, could you tell me about some of the research that you are working on right now, and the impacts that we might come to expect from it?
So right now we have maybe 10 or 12 different research projects going on at one time, quite a lot. And those projects are heavily, I think, focused on forests and how they're changing, or how they need certain types of management in order to keep them from changing in ways that we don't desire. And one of the projects I think that's probably most impactful is we are looking at the western wildfires particularly in California, but the research really applies to a lot of western states and some eastern states where fires are burning in ways that we think are unprecedented. And in many ways, forests are changing in unprecedented ways. In some places, forests aren't coming back quickly. They'll probably come back, but it may take the rest of my life to see the next tree to arrive. And so we're doing research at these sites to look at how these forests are changing, how they're rebounding. And interestingly, one of the leading solutions to the western wildfire crisis is to do more controlled burning. So bring more fire, good fire is what we call it, into these systems. They have adapted to fire. They should be having fire, but not these big raging fires that are, replacing these forests. So if we burn these forests more in a controlled way, what will those forests look like in the future? What will the habitat be for birds? What will be the water availability coming out of those watersheds? What will those forest products that come from trees that are continuously being exposed to fire? Those are very different trees than those that never experience fire. And so we're particularly interested in the forest products because fire has long been thought of as bad for forests and for forest products. And we think that that's not so black and white. We think that there are actually some real benefits to forest products by burning trees. And so we are looking at how the wood strength is changing if they're exposed to fire. We're looking at how the chemicals in the trees are changing if they're exposed to fire. We're looking at how the anatomy and the growth rates are changing. And we're going to show some really, really interesting results in the next year.
That was Dr. Michael Stambaugh, Director for the Center of Tree Ring Science here at Mizzou. If you'd like to learn more about what the center does to help us understand the plethora of amazing stories behind trees and tree rings, visit treerings.missouri.edu. I'm Rachael Norden, and you've been listening to Thinking Out Loud from KBIA 91.3 FM.